She was not a hybrid, the small gray bird screamed at them, beating her wings against the open sky. How dare a thing like her be counted among them, they said, on a matter with no basis at all. Is that so? One of them said, spreading black wings. Then let us settle it once and for all, hybrid. She would beat every arrogant one of them, she swore, and then she would go down to the human world. But her story does not begin in heaven. It begins 200 years below her, at a spring festival. A man caught sight of a woman across the crowd, and she was holding a glass she had entirely forgotten. Somebody jostled her from behind, and the petals came down over the pair of them at the same moment. He caught her arm before she could fall, and she looked up at him in complete and open surprise. He begged her pardon, he said, holding out one hand. Would she perhaps care to dance with him? It was a courtship that began with the spring wind, and the whole empire would retell it for years. That was how the emperor met the empress, and in time there was a child born out of that love. Richard Apollinarian, who would one day be emperor, grew up sitting among his mother's flower beds. He watched two parents who never once stopped being affectionate, and he drew his own conclusions. He saw his father hold his mother in the middle of an ordinary afternoon, for no reason at all. So naturally, he assumed that one day he too would fall in love, exactly as though it were destiny. The knights who fought beside him on the battlefield would have been stunned to hear him say it. A cold-blooded man without blood or tears, they called him, whose gloved hand had never once shaken. An emperor who does not even smile, quietly dreaming of a fated love no adolescent would admit to. He had been holding those feelings carefully for a destined partner who had not yet turned up. He was the emperor of an entire empire, and he was writing the same wretched letter for the fourth time. He held back the demons at the border, kept the imperial power stable, and kept his people fed. To catch a star, you have to look at the sky, he muttered and crushed the page in his fist. He should have courted somebody while he was still crown prince, exactly the way his father had. It felt deeply unfair, he thought, sighing at a white dove that had no opinion on the matter. Then he turned halfway around, because something in the corner of the room had just occurred to him. A single white egg sat inside an ornate iron bird cage on the polished floor of his own chamber. Where exactly had Durahan found that thing, he wondered, looking up at the bird on its perch. It did not look anything at all like an eagle's egg, and he had raised eagles since he was a boy. Then he remembered the imperial council he was already late for, and left at considerable speed. Behind him, in the empty room, the egg shifted very slightly inside the bars of its cage. It sat there all afternoon under the pipes and the pale wall, doing absolutely nothing at all. That evening he sat in his drawing room with the curtains drawn and the lamps already lit. His chamberlain, Count Crusoe, came in with the evening tea and set the tray down on the table. There were no appointments tomorrow morning, he said, so His Majesty ought to rest properly. It was pleasant, the Emperor said, to hear something agreeable for once in a very long time. Well, said Crusoe carefully, His Majesty did seem rather troubled about something lately. The Emperor closed his eyes over the rim of the cup and declined to answer that at all. And who exactly, he asked, had spent years following him around, urging him to find an empress? If he might offer one small piece of advice, Crusoe began, like a man walking toward the gallows. Were His Majesty's standards perhaps set a little too high, emperor or no emperor? A teacup came down onto a saucer with a sound that ended that entire conversation. If he had finished talking, the Emperor said, then he was very welcome to leave immediately. Very well, said Crusoe, retreating. And then he noticed the balcony window standing wide open. He would close it before he left, he said, crossing the room through the lamplight. It would be nice, he added, if His Majesty showed women half the interest he once showed birds. Then he stopped in the middle of the floor and turned around rather more sharply than usual. Your Majesty, he said, peering into the cage. What is this egg, and where on earth did it come from? Durahan brought it, the Emperor said. Was Durahan not male? Crusoe asked. Nobody had an answer. Then he would take his leave for the evening, Crusoe said, bowing toward the man on the couch. Wait a moment, the Emperor said, and the chamberlain froze with one glove half pulled off. Did that egg not move just now? He asked, sitting up and looking very hard at the cage. What on earth was His Majesty saying? How would an egg move? Surely the wind had shaken it. He had closed that window himself a moment ago, the Emperor pointed out, and Crusoe stopped smiling. Then ghosts, Crusoe said, and the two of them stared at one another across the darkened room. And in the gilded cage between them, the egg shifted again, entirely and unmistakably on its own. 200 years before that egg came down, a goddess sat on her throne above the clouds. Heliana would choose the most outstanding of her angels, and those chosen would be sent below. The demons of the human world were behaving strangely, and somebody had to learn their plot. After the training ended, she would select exactly one child to descend, and only one. The disciples of the goddess were not children at all, but birds waiting to become something else. A great hawk on a branch, an owl folded into the dark, every one of them born for this day. Strong and beautiful, all of them, with wings that could cross an entire sky in one heartbeat. A swan stood on still water, and the light came off her like something that was already holy. Except for one of them, a girl with silver hair and red eyes that nobody could account for. She would not be expecting to be chosen, would she? The black-haired one asked very sweetly. Why not, she said. She had practiced for 200 years, exactly the same as all of them. She closed both fists at her sides, and above the clouds nobody bothered to hide their laughing. While every other bird up there studied how to rule and dominate the human world below them. Haniel spent those 2 entire centuries working toward exactly one thing instead of that. Fighting demons, not governing men, not charming courts, not ruling anything, only fighting demons. Heliana had said plainly that they must learn the plots of the enemy and protect that world. So the important thing, she reasoned, was being able to beat one when the moment finally came. The strength of a demon is its magic, and she had seen what that magic does to a city. Which left her with exactly 2 ways of winning a fight against one of those things. The first was divine power, the light that an angel carries in her own 2 hands. Eagles were given devastating attack magic, and they never once let anybody forget about it. Swans were given healing magic strong enough to close an open wound in a few seconds. Her own attack magic was, by every measure anyone ever applied to it, extremely weak. But her defensive magic was strong, and she had decided long ago that it would have to be enough. So she went to a centaur instead and asked to be taught how to hit something properly. Faster! He shouted across the training ground, and she threw the same punch again. 200 years later, he put a lance cut from the heavenly oak into her hands. Was she really all right having learned only how to fight? He asked. The other angels had. He did not know what she truly was, he said, but no other bird had silver feathers like hers. She would not see him again for a long time once she went below, so he should take care. It was true that she wanted to be recognized as the best of them. But there was something else. The other girls giggled about it in the courtyards, and one day every one of them would remember it. Everyone up there preferred birds that were large and brightly colored, and she was neither. She closed her eyes among the flowers and allowed herself to want it anyway, quietly. It was only a rumor that silver feathers were an ill omen. She fully intended to disprove it. The trainee angel who would descend to the human world would be Haniel. She had worked hard. She had prepared for 2 centuries, and standing there she still wondered whether she could do it. Child, the goddess said, smiling down at her, you have the most beautiful soul I have ever seen. A hand came to rest on her silver hair, and the light behind the 2 of them turned gold. She knelt among the flowers with her hands together and did not trust herself to speak at all. Then she came out shouting it at the others, because she was not going to leave quietly. The 2 who had mocked her stood there with their composure entirely gone from their faces. Unlike her, she told them brightly, they all had the basics and remained thoroughly incompetent. And with that, Haniel went down through the light toward the human world far below. She arrived in the hollow of an old tree, in the middle of a forest, in the shape of an egg. A great white bird came down out of that sky with its talons open and its eyes burning red. And that was how the egg ended up inside a cage in the private chamber of an emperor. It sat on gold cushioning inside carved wood, warm for the first time in a very long while. Wait, she thought from inside the shell, why exactly was she hearing a human voice in here? She had been heading for an owl's nest. She had absolutely no idea how this had happened. And she could not simply climb out and look, because leaving the shell early would cost her magic. 30 days. If she broke out before then, she would not be able to use her power properly. It went quiet again, and she decided she had imagined the entire thing out of pure exhaustion. 200 years of training will do that to a person, she told herself, settling back down. For now she was sleepy, so she would sleep a little longer and sort all of it out in the morning. The palace stood in the early morning light with its towers pale against a completely clear sky. A maid came into the chamber, stopped dead in the middle of the floor, and stared at the cage. What exactly was that egg doing in the emperor's private cage, sitting on a gold cushion? Had Durahan laid it? She asked the chamberlain, who was already holding a list of the day's work. Was Durahan not male, he said. Then presumably the bird had brought it back as a snack. Was that not a little cruel? She asked, looking into the cage with genuine and open concern. It was only a poisonous mushroom last month, he said. A baby bird would certainly eat that too. He carried it down to the kitchens himself, calling for a chef who was not at his station. It was surprisingly heavy, he noted, turning it over in both hands. Something substantial was inside. Inside the shell, an angel who had trained for 2 centuries was becoming violently dizzy. Then a voice bellowed across the kitchen, demanding to know who was touching his counter. This was a snack for Durahan, the chamberlain explained. Frying it seemed the sensible option. The egg was set down on a wooden board, between a very large knife and a pile of onions. Somebody began humming, and a blade came off the rack with an extremely cheerful sound. Fry it, she thought, from inside her own shell. These people were going to fry her. He brought the knife down, and nothing happened. He tried again. Still absolutely nothing. The shell did not even mark, and something faintly geometric moved across the surface of it. He was shouting by then, and the entire kitchen had stopped work to watch him lose the argument. It was supposed to resist some impact, she thought frantically, but this was far too much of it. That was exactly why she had picked an owl's nest, she thought. And then the shell flashed. The egg came off the board and out through the doorway before anybody could get a hand on it. "Catch that egg!" the chef roared, and half the kitchen staff went out of the door after it. 2 maids in the corridor heard the noise and turned around directly into the path of it. Men in aprons came through the smoke of the kitchen door in a formation of absolute panic. And then a polished black boot came down and stopped the egg dead against the floorboards. "What?" the emperor asked. Without raising his voice at all, were every single one of them doing? "That egg," the chef stammered. They had been making a snack for Durahan, and then it ran away. "Enough," he said, and picked it up off the floor with something remarkably close to care. "Your Majesty," said Crusoe behind him. "That egg. Could it possibly be? Yes, yesterday's egg." The pattern under his fingers caught the light and turned briefly and unmistakably gold. "Your Majesty," Crusoe said, and his voice had gone entirely flat. "That marking on the shell? On the day a divine bird of silver and gold descends upon this land, the old text says, the empire will at last stand in eternal glory. Every child in that palace knew the line." The emperor turned away with the egg held against his chest and did not say anything. The 2 of them stood in a room hung with paintings of hawks, and neither of them moved. It was larger than an ordinary egg, they argued. It had to be a magical egg of some kind. Yesterday, all of them had agreed it was possessed by a ghost, and nobody wished to revisit that. They could not be certain of anything, Crusoe said, because nobody knew who the parents were. He said it standing on the stairs, then heard how it sounded out loud and stopped talking. So what were they to do with the thing? The emperor said he would take care of it himself. He is trying to keep me safe, she thought inside the shell, and had no idea what to do with that. 3 court mages in dark robes stood around the cage and studied it for a very long while. They felt nothing bad from it at all, they reported. On the contrary, they felt something strong. There is elemental magic which wizards use, and everybody in the empire had seen that before. And there is demonic magic, which arrives with claws and fire and does not negotiate with anyone. But sacred magic is a third thing entirely, and it had not been seen within living memory. That night the palace stood black against the stars, and one window on the upper floor was lit. A being of sacred energy, he said to the cage. He wondered what on earth it would look like. It would be fascinating if a great hawk came out of it, he admitted to absolutely nobody. He read 3 separate books on the raising of birds and understood approximately none of it. Durahan slept through the whole business on a gold cushion, having caused the entire situation. He should calm down, he told himself. Everything would work out because of this little one. Even the ministers who only ever spoke of choosing an empress had started asking about the egg. He fell asleep over an open book with one hand resting lightly against the side of the shell. She had assumed the first time was a hallucination, the way any reasonable person would. But a human hand, it turns out, is warm, and it makes an angel fall asleep very quickly indeed. Then one night he sat up sharply in his chair, because something had definitely made a sound. He picked the egg up and turned it over in the lamplight and found absolutely nothing wrong. The cage sat on the marble table beside the tall window, exactly where it always sat. Did His Majesty know that speaking to a child in the womb helps it develop? Crusoe asked him. If he intended to say childish things like that, the emperor replied, He should say them elsewhere. "But, Your Majesty," said Katerine the housekeeper, who was considerably braver than the chamberlain. She had read that speaking to plants helps them grow. Perhaps the same principle applied here. "Really," said the emperor, in the exact tone of a man who had already decided to try it. Behind him, Crusoe demanded to know why nobody listened. Nobody yet knew what was inside that egg. So what exactly should he talk to it about? He asked the cage, one hand under his chin. Perhaps a children's book. He considered that option for some time and then rejected it. No, he decided. Whatever was inside there almost certainly would not enjoy that at all. Once an empress is chosen, he said instead, they will start talking about heirs. He disliked it. A warm and gentle voice, she thought, listening to an emperor complain about his court to an egg. Though he could be, she noted with interest, remarkably foul-mouthed about his own ministers. Everything would be a great deal simpler on a battlefield, he told her the following evening. Then he could kill the ministers who said stupid things immediately, instead of waiting for years. Every time he thought about the soldiers who died out there, he said, the guilt closed his throat. If she could only get out now, she thought, she would wrap both wings right around him. The demons attacked the border, he told her one night, and she sat bolt upright inside her shell. The soldiers he sent had handled all of it, he added, stroking the shell. She should not worry. She wanted out of there. She wanted to go and break every last one of those things in half. He had a great many subordinates, he said quietly, and nobody he could actually speak to. From the outside, it looked as though a great many people followed that man everywhere he went. And every single time he showed her the tired half of himself, she recognized it immediately. So on the 30th day since she arrived in this world, a crack opened across the shell. It ran slowly through the lamplight in front of an imperial chair that nobody was sitting in. This peaceful place is called Apollinarian, the first nation in history to unify a whole continent. And the symbol carved above every one of its gates is not a lion or a sword, but a bird. The goddess of the beginning first came down to this land wearing the shape of a bird. So every person born in this nation must serve the bird. It is the founding legend of the empire. That evening, the fire was lit in the emperor's chamber, and his chamberlain would not stop talking. When exactly was that egg going to hatch? Crusoe asked. The emperor had no idea whatsoever. It would not take tens of years, would it? Crusoe added in the voice of a genuinely worried man. Tens of years, the emperor repeated slowly, and looked over at the cage with real alarm. And then, in the middle of that conversation, something split across the surface of the shell. Your Majesty, Crusoe shouted. It had cracked. It looked as though it might hatch at any moment. Summon every minister in this palace, the emperor said, and the court painter. Immediately. The chamberlain went out of that room faster than he had moved in 20 years of service. Was that the rumored holy bird's egg? They whispered. It looked considerably smaller than expected. The emperor sat with his hands folded and refused to look excited in front of any of them. Was it hatching now? Somebody breathed. Nobody knew. Nobody was willing to guess out loud. He straightened his own collar twice, which the entire room politely pretended not to notice. Then he raised one finger to his lips, and 40 of the most powerful men alive went silent. 2 ministers exchanged a look behind him and decided that today was going to be memorable. How noisy all of them were, he said, in the tone of a man who had summoned them there himself. His eyes stayed fixed on the cage, and the gold in them caught the light of the lamps. Then the shell began to shine, and the pattern across it opened out like something being written. 4 grown men leaned in toward a birdcage as though it were a battlefield map in a war tent. At last, he thought, watching it split. At last, after 30 entire days of talking to a shell. He wanted very badly to help it along, and he made himself keep both hands exactly where they were. One does not meddle in a holy bird's fight to break out of its own egg. Everyone knew that much. Phoenix. He had chosen the name weeks ago and could not wait to finally use it out loud. What kind of bird would come out of it, he wondered, watching the cracks widen across the shell. A great eagle, perhaps, of the kind that men write songs about for 300 years afterward. A sharp hawk, or something that nobody in this entire world had ever put a name to before. The shell came apart at last, and every single man in that room went absolutely rigid. 3 ministers stood shoulder to shoulder, none of them breathing, all of them staring hard. Something small and pale sat in the wreckage of the shell with a tuft of gold on its head. It made a very small sound, opened 2 very small wings, and looked around the room at them. What was that? Somebody said at last. Was that a piece of cotton candy somebody had left there? Frankly, said another, It looked rather more like a lump of raw flour with feathers stuck in it. "Shut up," said the emperor without turning his head, and the room remembered its manners. "Yes," said the minister in the small voice of a man who had recalled his own mortality. "All of them would keep their mouths closed," he said, one gloved hand flat against the table. Because he informed them evenly, the person in this room who was most shocked of all. What in the world, he thought, staring down into the cage, is this thing supposed to be? The bird hopped along the perch on two ridiculous feet and seemed extremely pleased with itself. He stood very still while sweat came out on his temple, and his entire legend rearranged itself. Somewhere in that palace hung a painting of an eagle, and it had never once looked so smug. The bird flapped twice, achieved almost no altitude whatsoever, and landed among the petals. And the Emperor of Apollinaриan looked at it and could not think of one single thing to say. He apologized, the court scholar said, but he had never seen this breed of bird before. What species was it, the emperor asked? Was it related to a crow tit or possibly a sparrow? Judging by appearance alone, the man admitted, it resembled a crow tit and a long-tailed tit. Then he adjusted his glasses and stopped talking, having run out of survivable answers. But it was certainly not an eagle, one of them said cheerfully, and immediately regretted it. The emperor turned around slowly, and the man took one step backward without deciding to. Did they imagine, he asked the room, that he had somehow failed to notice that himself? Yet exactly as the legend promised, there were strands of gold running through those white feathers. "Phoenix," he said, and held out one hand toward the open cage. "Come here to me." His sleeve fell back, and every minister in that room watched an emperor wait to be trusted. And the small, ridiculous creature hopped straight onto his palm and settled down there. He turned to face them with it sitting in his hand and announced the birth of the holy bird. The rumor crossed the entire country inside a week, and the emperor's standing rose along with it. "Perhaps it was exactly like that," Crusoe announced the next morning, with both arms in the air. He pointed at the painting of a hawk on the wall while two other men watched him do it. There was no doubt about it at all. This was a new conviction, and everything was going to change. "This," said the emperor from his chair, "is what people generally mean by the word transformation." Was that genuinely what his chamberlain was proposing to him at this hour of the morning? It could not possibly be true. Nothing Count Crusoe ever said had turned out to be true. Then he crouched down in front of the cage and asked whether she truly was the Holy Phoenix. The small white bird shut both eyes and made a noise that could only be described as smug. Did she understand everything that he said to her? He asked, watching her far too closely. She flapped twice on the perch, which he decided to interpret as an answer of some kind. She wanted him to open the cage. He asked her that out loud, and then felt slightly foolish. His hand went to the little door anyway. He had never refused her, and that habit would cost him. She came out into the room, and the light through the curtains caught every white feather. What exactly was the meaning of this? He demanded. Was she attempting to act adorable at him? She landed on the lamp, chirped twice, and the Emperor of Apollinaриan lost that argument. Perhaps, he said, smiling before he could stop himself, he ought to change her name after all. His fingers brushed the top of her head, and she leaned into it without any dignity at all. She was far too small and far too ridiculous to be called Phoenix, he informed her seriously. Judging by her reaction, she disagreed, so he promised to keep it, and she settled back down. Later that night, he sank into the bath and let the steam take the day off his shoulders. Even he had been startled by the holy bird, but he could hardly show that to his own subjects. He could not let any of them see a weakness, and there was nobody at all to hand one to. He had to get used to this particular kind of loneliness the way a soldier gets used to weight. For the next 10 years, perhaps, possibly 20. He had stopped counting somewhere in there. All he had ever wanted was a friend, and that had turned out to be the hardest thing to buy. Well, he murmured, drying his hair. It could not be helped. He would make do with Phoenix. Although it was hard to judge from appearance, Phoenix was far smaller than any other bird. Could it be, he wondered, sinking lower into the water, that she would grow larger from here? He pictured a bird the size of the throne room chirping at him and felt a genuine chill. If that was the case, he decided, then perhaps she was better off exactly as she was now. Then he caught her staring at him from the doorway with both of her eyes enormously wide. And why exactly, he asked her, were her eyes sparkling at him quite like that? No, he was overthinking the entire thing. She was a bird, and he was extremely tired. He dressed and sat down beside the lamp, and she came and stood on the arm of his chair. She made a small questioning noise at him, and he looked down at her for a long while. "Sleep well, Phoenix," he said, and she chirped twice and did not move away from his side. But inside that small, ridiculous body, an angel had seen something and was not recovering. She had seen all of it perfectly clearly. The light, the shoulders, the entire ridiculous situation. And that hair, she thought, which was the exact gold the gods use in their own portraits. Even an eagle who considered himself the finest specimen alive would collapse in front of this. Nobody in either world, she concluded, was ever going to find a better partner than this man. She liked him from head to foot. She had made up her mind, and she was not letting go of him. "Human," she announced to a sleeping emperor who understood not one word of it, "you are my mate." The next morning began with a noise from the balcony that nobody in the palace could identify. Something small and gray sat in the middle of the floor with its entire face covered in colors. That crazy eagle, she was thinking, glaring up at the enormous white bird sitting on the rail. She was pinned in the doorway with her feet wrapped in something and no dignity left at all. "No," she screamed, in a language nobody in that entire building was equipped to understand. The great bird opened its beak above her and made a sound like a door being forced open. "This," Durahan was explaining patiently, "is how one eats." He had brought her breakfast himself. She was a holy bird, she informed him. He was unmoved. She had no idea what to do next. What an entirely unscrupulous creature, she thought, retreating into the cage with her feathers up. Then the door opened and the man came in, and everything else stopped mattering to her. "So she recognized him now," he said, sounding far more pleased about it than an emperor should. "She had been hungry since yesterday," he added, crossing the room toward the little silver bell. He rang it exactly once, which in that palace was the same thing as issuing a military order. "Get Phoenix some food," he said. Crusoe asked, reasonably, what a phoenix actually eats. Insects were rejected immediately, so the emperor proposed grains, and she agreed enthusiastically. "By the way," Crusoe said, setting down the day's schedule. He seemed very close to his holy bird. "Was that so?" the emperor said. He thought she liked him. She also seemed to understand him, which meant, he realized with visible delight, that he could simply ask her things directly. "Phoenix," he said, "does your appearance change over time? Will you become larger than this?" He stood there holding a black ledger with a bird on his shoulder, waiting for a proper reply. She looked back at him with red eyes and did not have the heart to tell him the true answer. "She really does understand you," Crusoe shouted, and both of his hands went into the air again. "So would she become a hawk?" he asked. He was already excited. The emperor closed both eyes. "An eagle," she thought furiously from the shoulder. How dare that man call her an eagle? She looked up at a crown on a stand and thought about a promise made above the clouds. Her connection was in the human world. That was what the goddess told her before she fell. And she had spent 30 days inside a shell listening to that connection talk to her. He stood there in the library light with a rose on the desk beside him, entirely unaware of it. She flew one small delighted circle around the room and knocked over absolutely nothing at all. Wait a little longer, human, she thought. She was going to surprise him properly very soon. That evening, the kitchens delivered everything a bird could conceivably eat, arranged by course. He sat down in front of a table of fruit and greens as though attending a formal state dinner. She landed on the cloth and looked at all of it with both wings still half open in disbelief. She could not believe he was serving her this, she complained. He said she was being cute. Then she put her head down over a plate of strawberries and stopped complaining entirely. She worked her way through a slice of carrot with total concentration and absolutely no elegance. 2 maids and a chamberlain stood there watching a holy bird eat, and none of them blinked. "Stop staring at her," the emperor said. Could they not see that she was feeling self-conscious? Afterward, she fell asleep on the marble beside a few surviving leaves of lettuce. "Where on earth," Crusoe muttered to a maid, "had that man been keeping this side of himself?" He did not want his own personality to become that, he added. Still, he was glad of the mood. "Because today's schedule," he said, straightening up again, "was going to be extremely tight." She woke, flew to the shoulder she had already claimed, and settled against his collar. It had been delicious, she told him. "Thank you, mate." He heard exactly 2 small chirps. A charming little bird, he thought, lifting her carefully. This was really not so bad at all. He woke slowly in a room full of morning light, with something small standing on his pillow. He had not expected this, he thought. Not this quickly, and certainly not from a bird. He stroked her head by the window where the red roses were, and she leaned into his hand. Then he bent down and kissed the top of her head, and she fell over sideways onto the sill. In the celestial realm, you court first, then you propose, and only after that do you kiss. This human had gone straight for the kiss before the courting started. She approved entirely. From today onward, he announced at breakfast, he would take Phoenix with him wherever he went. Take the bird with him everywhere, Crusoe repeated, exchanging a look with the housekeeper. Now that he mentioned it, a maid said, the Phoenix really did follow His Majesty very closely. That was true. Normally, animals tended to dislike, or rather to avoid, His Majesty entirely. Only Durahan and the war horses had ever been exceptions to that particular rule of nature. Even the previous emperor's companion birds had been frightened of him when he was a boy. She was intelligent, Crusoe said quickly. Not one of them guessed how much she actually understood. Let us go, said the emperor, ending that conversation. The schedule today was extremely full. Out in the yard, two blades met and rang, and a training bout went on without any of them. The weather was fine today, Lady Katrin observed, standing against the brick wall in the sun. Winter would be upon them soon enough, the other one said, and about the border situation. In the room above them, a small white bird slept on a gold cushion inside an open cage. It had been dealt with, she said, every one of them buried alive and confirmed by a head count. Good. His Majesty had been concerned. She was to make sure not a single one was left alive. Lord Katrin, high-ranking Shadow Knight assigned to protect Rishar and specializing in assassination. Amanda's demon hunting was exceptional, and she never reported a thing she was unsure about. Even so, Katrin could not relax whenever she thought about that one particular day. A year ago, the Emperor had stood in a red field with his sword up and blood across the white. Something had come out of the dark at him faster than any of his own guards could move. Your Majesty, somebody had screamed, and two demons closed on him from both sides at once. The demons had rushed him like animals in a burning barn, and nobody ever understood why. They must have been drawn to something the Emperor carries, she thought. Something on his person. Whatever it was, she said, they were going to protect it at absolutely any cost required. They had hunters placed all through the palace in case of any unexpected situation. But a high-ranking demon in disguise could not be identified by a single one of them. Meanwhile, in the council chamber, a small bird was being unbearably cute at everybody present. He had known the servants whispered every single time he walked past with the Phoenix. But to have his ministers distracted in the middle of an actual meeting was another matter. She was thinking of raising a small bird like His Majesty's Phoenix, one duchess announced. She already owned several birds that were the symbol of her own house, Crusoe pointed out. Yes, she said happily, but after seeing His Majesty's Phoenix, hers all seemed rather plain. So she was considering a sparrow instead, or possibly a titmouse if one could be found. The Emperor looked down the length of the table with something dangerous behind his eyes. They really did think of everything, he said, and pressed one hand against his own forehead. Then he brought that hand down onto the table, and the entire room stopped moving at all. Starting today, he announced, the procedures for adopting companion birds would be tightened. The curtains did not move. Nobody breathed. Somewhere in the room, a clock kept going anyway. What? Said the Duchess, and behind her another noblewoman began quietly applauding this. She should take proper care of the birds she already had, he told her, instead of collecting more. Phoenix, he said then, and held out one gloved hand toward the far end of the chamber. Come here. She crossed that room and landed on it, and 40 nobles watched their emperor soften completely. He walked out through the red carpet with her on his shoulder and said nothing further to them. Feed me, she demanded on the way, in a language he had stopped pretending to misunderstand. Was there another bird anywhere in the world, he wondered? This intelligent and this adorable. She chirped at him from 3 inches away, and he had to cover his own face for a moment. He could not deny it any longer, and he had stopped trying around the second week of it. He had completely lost his heart to a tiny, ridiculous bird, and the entire palace knew it. The tea table was laid out on white marble, and for once nobody had brought him bad news. Had he ever been this happy, he wondered, with both eyes shut against the afternoon light? Phoenix was not Durahan. If she went outside alone, she would simply become food for larger birds. So in future, every corridor window would stay closed, and he would keep her beside him. Come here, holy Phoenix, Crusoe called from across the room with both arms held wide open. He was beaming, and there were actual roses behind him, and he was extremely confident about it. She looked at him with an expression of the purest contempt and did not move a single inch. That was too much, Crusoe said, folding up around the wound to his professional pride. A satisfaction he could not hide crossed the Emperor's face. Naturally, she would not go to anyone. "Come to me, Phoenix," said the housekeeper, and Crusoe told her not to even bother trying. The bird looked over at the offered hand and considered the entire political situation carefully. "She came," somebody shouted out loud. She actually hopped straight onto Katarine's hand. And why exactly, thought the Emperor of Apollinarian, was it not him that she went to? How could she make that face while sitting on somebody else's hand, he demanded of a bird. That night he lay back in the bath and reached for the little wooden thing on the table. This human, she thought, watching him from the edge of the tub among all the roses. Why on earth was he so utterly shameless about all of this? She could not cope with him. Bathing together before the wedding ceremony. She was dying of shame, and the water was lovely. No matter how long she thought about it, he was simply perfect as a partner for her. By the rules of heaven, one condition must be met for an angel and a human to become a pair. And that condition was simple enough. She must keep the fact that she is an angel a secret. "Phoenix," he said, leaning over the edge of the tub, and that voice went straight through her. "This person, she thought, is going to love me truly, past any condition heaven can invent." He dried her carefully afterward, one feather at a time, saying nothing in particular at all. She stood on the tiles being thoroughly fussed over and did not object even slightly to it. Since taking the throne, he told her, nobody in the Empire calls him by his name anymore. He had not heard it from his mother or his father since the day they left the palace. If she is ever able to speak, he said, he would like her to call him Rishar. "Leave it to her," she chirped back at him and promised to sing until his ears exploded. Then marriage was raised in the National Assembly, and the palace went quiet for several days. Marriage, she thought from the curtain rail, that worked out beautifully. She wanted one too. Was it really so greedy, he asked the ceiling, to want to meet somebody who was meant for him? No, she shrieked from somewhere above him. She was right here. She was the destined one. He picked her out of the air with both hands and had no idea what she had just said. "They say an angel with pretty wings shoots an arrow into people's hearts," he told her. "It would be nice," he said, "if an arrow like that ever came flying at him. Just like this." He poked her gently in the middle, and she made a noise of complete and total outrage. He looked down at her with both eyes very wide, and then he started laughing at her. And an emperor sat on the floor of his own bedroom laughing at a bird in the lamplight. Outside, far past the gardens, the trees stood still under a sky that had gone entirely wrong. Something with white bristling fur and red eyes released a wave of power into the dark. A man looked up at a thing with violet horns standing 3 times his own height above him. "Do not kill him," he was saying, with one hand raised and absolutely nothing behind it. And the dark came down over him in a wave, and those woods went entirely silent. The council hall stood in its usual state of gilt and velvet and very quiet dread. Demons had begun appearing along the border, and so far there had been no casualties at all. But the attacks were multiplying, so they would need more mages and more magic swordsmen. "Your Majesty!" Crusoe shouted. "Are you listening at all? The documents he requested yesterday." "Yes," said the Emperor, who had spent that entire meeting watching a bird sleep on his shoulder. He was so sweet to Phoenix and permanently furious with him. Crusoe complained to nobody. It was lovely that he adored the holy bird, but something was already coming to take her away. "Your Majesty," he said, in the specific tone that meant the subject was about to change. He could not delay this particular problem any longer, and he knew that perfectly well himself. If he did not want an arranged meeting, perhaps he might meet a few ladies in disguise. He had said months ago that he wanted no forced introductions, and Crusoe had gone quiet then. But Crusoe was right, and he was emperor, and his people needed peace and a succession. He could not avoid taking an empress. He had known that since the day of his own coronation. Or perhaps, Crusoe said, raising one finger with the air of a man about to be brilliant, why not find somebody among the delegations arriving from the other nations this month? That, said the Emperor slowly, is not actually a bad idea at all now that he mentions it. Really? Crusoe said, in the voice of a man who had never been agreed with in his entire life. Yes, said the Emperor, turning a ring on his finger with a bird asleep beside his collar. He had promised it out loud. Crusoe went to fetch a list of candidates at a dead run. Phoenix, said the Emperor to the small white shape sitting on the dark polished wood. When the delegations arrived, he told her, he fully intended to show her off to all of them. She chirped once and pretended she had understood nothing whatsoever of that conversation. Today, she thought much later, she had felt a demon's presence inside that council chamber. Could it possibly be one of the people who had been sitting around that very table? No. In this form, she could not pinpoint anything, so first she had to become human safely. After that, she thought. Sliding into sleep on a chair far too large for her, she could look. Haniel, said the goddess in the dream, she must keep the secret from the human she chose. But what if he worked it out on his own? She asked, before she received true love from him. That would not be possible, the goddess said, but if it happened, she would grant permission. But what, she asked, if she received that love while she was still in the shape of a bird? Her voice would not come out at all. The goddess was already turning away into the light. She woke on a marble floor with her heart hammering and no idea what the answer had been. How could her voice have cut off at exactly that point? She screamed, waking 3 servants. Then she lay back down among the pink cushions and went straight back to sleep again. "Oh my," said a maid from the doorway, and the entire room turned around to look at her. The emperor came in mid-sentence and stopped talking in the middle of an actual word. Somebody had put the bird down in the middle of the roses, and she was fast asleep in them. 2 maids stood there with both hands pressed over their mouths, saying absolutely nothing. Both of them looked at the emperor. The emperor looked at the bird. Nobody moved at all. "Go and call the palace seamstress," he said without looking away from her. Immediately. Here were the capes he had requested, the seamstress announced, holding up 2 of them. "How about the one on the right?" she suggested. He considered it with total seriousness. He sat back in the chair, folded both arms, and made what amounted to a decision of state. Then they would put that one on her, a maid said. He appeared to like it a great deal. A hand adjusted a tiny white hood, and somewhere behind them somebody made a strangled sound. "Oh my God," one of them wailed. It was too much. What on earth were they supposed to do now? He looked away from all of them and did not entirely succeed in hiding his own expression. "Were the royal painters ready?" he asked. "They were ready to begin at once, Your Majesty." The art they produced today, he informed them, would be hung throughout the entire palace. So all of them should do their very best work, he said, and every one of them understood. "Phoenix," he said, and held out his hand toward the cushion. "Come here to me." At first he had wanted an eagle out of that shell, or a hawk, exactly as in the old paintings. How adorable she was, the maids sighed over the new paintings hanging along the great stair. The Sun Palace maids must get to see her every single day, one of them said with open envy. She was still jealous, she announced to the corridor, and then something small shot past her head. "Was that," she said slowly, turning around, "was that the Holy Phoenix loose in the corridor?" "Holy Phoenix!" shrieked a maid, sprinting after it with a feather duster still in one hand. "What exactly is happening?" the 2 of them asked each other, and neither had any answer. "What exactly?" said a voice in the emperor's study. Did he mean by the word disappeared? "That," said Crusoe, standing directly in front of him. "That is to say, the thing is that—" "The Holy Phoenix," he managed at last, and then found he could not finish the sentence. "Grand Chamberlain," somebody said, "are you quite all right?" A man had gone down to his knees. "Summon the knights," somebody said. "No. Tell His Majesty, no. Do not tell His Majesty anything." What exactly, Crusoe asked the ceiling above him, was he supposed to do with this information? "What is the matter?" the emperor asked, and every man in that room stopped breathing at once. "Your Majesty," Crusoe said, with actual tears standing openly in both of his eyes. "The Holy Phoenix," he said. "Your Majesty. The Holy Phoenix has—" And then he stopped again. The temperature in that study dropped far enough that even the candles appeared to notice. "Release every knight in this palace," the emperor said, "and bring Durahan to me right now." Meanwhile, the Holy Phoenix was flying over the trees and enjoying herself enormously. She landed near the laundry lines, where somebody had carelessly left carrots out in the sun. So she told that knight, a laundry maid was saying, and then she screamed instead of finishing. "Was that the Holy Phoenix?" they whispered. "Why was she here? Had she flown all this way alone?" If that was the bird the emperor had lost, then they absolutely had to catch it right now. 2 grown women went over backward into a laundry basket, and the bird kept right on eating. "It is the Holy Phoenix," a knight bellowed across the whole garden. "Catch her immediately." "Holy Phoenix," a maid called, running through the flower beds. "Please stop right there." And that arrogant brat, she thought bitterly, looking up at the sky above her head. Durahan kept circling overhead exactly the way he always did before he hunted something. She could not believe everyone was this determined to catch her. Outside really was dangerous. When, she wondered, flapping harder now, was Risher going to come and collect her from this? She landed on a yellow chair somewhere quiet and folded both of her wings down flat. It had been a long time since she flew properly, and she was becoming extremely tired. So she fell asleep on a gold cushion under a window, in a wing nobody had searched yet. Hours later, a man in a badly crumpled coat stood alone in the middle of his own bedroom. In the end, he had not found her anywhere, and he had run out of places left to look. He stood there in the violet light of an evening he had not even noticed arriving. And then he saw her, asleep in the carved cage on the cushion exactly where she started. He let out a breath that he had been holding for most of that entire afternoon. "Phoenix," he said, and she opened one eye and made a small confused sound at him. She had frightened him badly, he told her, lifting her out of the cage with both hands. Why on earth was he being like this, she wondered, tilting her head over at him. "Do not ever leave me," he said, and she stopped tilting her head entirely at that. Had he been looking for her, she thought. All day. Had he really been looking all day? He did not want to lock her up, he said very quietly. He had never wanted to do that. Two small black claws pressed against the palm of his hand, and he did not move at all. "Do not worry about it," she chirped at him. She was going to stay right beside him. He lifted her up level with his face, and she looked back. He had no idea what he was holding. "My little bird," he said, in a voice nobody in that entire empire had ever heard him use. And he brought her up against his mouth, and neither of them moved for quite a while. Beyond the continent of Apollinarian lies Perso, where a dozen small kingdoms crowd together. They had allied with the empire and fought the same war, and humans still doubted each other. "Your Majesty," Crusoe began. He had heard the women of the Bane Kingdom were strong and beautiful. "What exactly," said the Emperor, without looking up from his papers, was he attempting to say? Nothing at all. It was a desert kingdom. Was His Majesty not even the slightest bit curious? Very well then, Crusoe said. He would take his leave now. Was it truly over? The Emperor wondered. So the wedding would be held very soon, Crusoe added from the doorway, and then fled the room. Crusoe, the Emperor said to an empty study, had finished that piece of work remarkably fast. "Your Majesty," said Chad, commander of the Guard Knights, handing over the requested papers. Count Crusoe was being very eager about all of this, the knight observed extremely carefully. The Emperor read the page with his chin on his hand and said nothing at all for a while. Chad was a handsome and capable man, and the palace had noticed that fact several years ago. One of the women once named as a candidate for Empress had not received that position. Her face reddened every time she saw him, so it was fairly obvious where her heart had gone. It seemed His Majesty had nobody at all in mind, and that was the entire problem here. Chad stood there in his red cloak and thought about how badly all of this could end. If there was nobody in the principality, a woman from a close relation could be nominated. In that case, the Emperor said, Sir Chad, was there something that he wished to say? No, but he understood Count Crusoe's concern, the knight replied very carefully indeed. Crusoe was clearly carrying out a great many things, the Emperor said, almost smiling at him. Your Majesty, Chad said, how about taking tea with some ladies of his own age sometime? The room went quiet, and Chad realized what he had done at approximately the same moment. That kind of thing, the Emperor said. How long exactly did he intend to postpone the marriage? He apologized, the knight said, bowing low. Somewhere behind them, a small bird chirped once. Surely, thought Chad, glancing sideways at the cage, surely this bird was extremely cute. Rather more so than the enormous paintings of it now hanging in every corridor of the palace. Sir Chad, said the Emperor, and the knight snapped back to attention almost immediately. He had checked everything already so the man could go. Chad went with very visible relief. He bowed at the door, and his red cloak turned the corner, and then the study was empty. At last everyone had gone and every window was closed, so it really should be safe now. Phoenix, the Emperor said, opening the little door of the cage. You can come out now. Guests would be arriving at the palace tomorrow, he told her. It was going to be noisy. She chirped an answer at him, and he wished, not for the first time, that he understood it. She hopped along the windowsill past a vase of hydrangeas, thinking hard about tomorrow. Then she flew one small circle around his head and made a great deal of noise about it. He stroked the top of her head, and she closed both eyes and leaned straight into it. Come to think of it, he said, still stroking her. There was something about that date. Phoenix had been out of the shell for 100 days as of tomorrow evening exactly. The first goddess came down into the human world and stayed for exactly 100 days. So in this empire, 100 means something, and he had been thinking about holding a ball. She lay on her side among the sparkles and considered that offer extremely seriously. How about marrying her on that day instead? She shrieked at him. He heard only 2 chirps. After 100 days, she would be able to take a human form whenever she wanted to. And what, she thought, standing among the white flowers if he did not like her face? You are my mate in the human world, he was telling a bird who understood every word of it. She looked up at him with red eyes, and she had already entirely made up her mind about it. When she became human, she decided the very first thing she would do was kiss that man. Did you hear? The servants whispered, as the quiet sapphire palace filled up with strangers. The empress herself might emerge from one of these delegations, and every one of them knew it. Every eye in that hall was fixed on the man sitting at the top of the great staircase. And of all of them, the most excited by a considerable margin was Count Crusoe himself. Finally, he thought, nearly vibrating. Today might be the day an empress candidate is decided. Fortunately, His Majesty's beauty was shining even more brightly than usual this particular morning. He reached over and adjusted the emperor's collar with the tenderness of a devoted mother. Your Majesty, he whispered, please smile. It will make the ladies take a liking to you. He was very nearly begging by the end of it, and the emperor did not move a single muscle. Crusoe was not wrong about any of it, he thought. That was the genuinely irritating part. But he could not stop thinking about the phoenix he had left behind upstairs in his rooms. It was hardly feasible to bring a small bird to a formal greeting with foreign delegations. Perhaps he would simply finish all of this as fast as possible and go back upstairs again. Down the corridor, a knight in polished armor stood at attention beneath a blue banner. Ah, Your Majesty, Crusoe hissed at him. They have arrived, quickly. Smile, please smile now. The delegation from the Kingdom of Barbe has arrived, the herald announced to the hall. Count Crusoe, said the emperor. Yes, said Crusoe, straightening up like a raw recruit. Stop chattering at me, he said without moving his eyes at all, and lead the way down. Indeed, he thought a moment later. He understood now why Crusoe had made such an enormous fuss. The Barbe royals came in with thin veils across their faces, which only amplified the effect. And underneath those veils were the sea-colored eyes that only the Barbie bloodline carries. One of them bowed very low in the middle of the marble floor, and the whole hall watched it. The emperor inclined his head exactly the correct number of degrees and absolutely nothing more. Just as the rumors said, the princess thought, watching him. This man does seem rather cold. Let us go inside, he said, and turned. And she smiled behind the veil at his retreating back. Behind them, a servant was down on the floor gathering up documents somebody had dropped. What could they do? One of the Barbe royals said. His Majesty was clearly not interested in her. She told her brother not to worry about her. Women, she noted, tend to dislike divorced men. The 2 of them stood facing each other in the corridor, and neither one of them backed down. That was extremely irritating, he thought, watching her walk away with her chin held up. Was it his fault? He demanded of nobody at all that his crown princess had run off on him. He had not been especially pure to begin with, but to be made a fool of quite like this. Yes, he decided. She was right. He had come here to find a bride, so he would make an effort. He would proudly bring home a noble lady, he announced. She could go and flirt with the maids. How much longer, the princess thought bitterly, was she going to be stuck living like this? And then that man made a particular face, and she stopped thinking about anything else at all. She had felt it the very first time she saw him. He was a genuinely, uniquely beautiful man. What exactly, she wondered, was he looking at over there, to be smiling at it quite like that? She followed his eyes to a portrait of the emperor hanging along the corridor wall. She had never imagined there was anybody who looked better in person than in a painting. Truly, she thought, watching him move through that hall. A genuinely desirable figure of a man. Then she looked at the painting again, and at the small white thing inside it, and she said it. There was something small and white sitting in the corner of the imperial portrait. What is that? She asked out loud before she could stop herself. Is that a quail? Every noble within earshot flinched, and one of them stepped physically backward. A quail, the emperor repeated in a voice that lowered the temperature of the entire room. Elsewhere in the palace, the fire was lit and 2 servants were gossiping over it. So would they finally have an empress? And was a foreigner truly better than their own nobles? To be His Majesty's consort, one of them said, a woman would have to be a princess at minimum. Then they found the papers they had dropped and hurried off before anybody could scold them. And up in the emperor's chambers, a small white bird sat perfectly still in the dark. The emperor stood in front of the red curtains and did not blink for several long seconds. "How dare anyone," Crusoe exploded, "in this place? A quail. That is the empire's holy phoenix." 3 men in formal dress looked down at 2 women who had begun bowing very rapidly indeed. "That insignificant bird is the phoenix," somebody whispered. "Did it not diminish the national dignity?" The rumors they had heard were rather different, one of the veiled envoys admitted quietly. Barbie was a small and weak country compared to the empire, and everybody in that hall knew it. They apologized sincerely, the envoy said. They had understood it to be a very large eagle. He would guide them to the reception rooms, Crusoe said, in a voice like a closing door. "Your Majesty," he added afterward, "please do not take any of that too much to heart." "They were simply uninformed people from the desert," said Jacques-Pierre, one of 5 great dukes. He was glad, the emperor said quietly, that he had not brought the phoenix down with him. The Lennox delegation would arrive this afternoon, so he ought to rest until the dinner. He would accompany him. Crusoe sniffed. His own heart was broken, and he needed to see her too. It was nearly 100 days since the phoenix hatched, and that mattered in this empire. A momentous day indeed, Crusoe said, brightening. He ought to prepare a gift for Lord Phoenix. That evening, the balcony stood empty with its plants and its carved chairs in the dark. 2 small sounds came from the window, and a bird sat on the sill looking out at the carriages. Why were so many people arriving here today, she wondered, watching them come up the drive. "My clever and adorable phoenix," the emperor said, lifting her carefully in both of his hands. Tonight's good-night greeting, she thought happily, had been an extremely good one. He must keep loving her even after she became human, she informed him very seriously. She had told him she adored him to death, and he had not understood one single word of it. He fell asleep with the lamp still burning, and she sat and watched him for a while. At least there was no problem at all with her and Richard's love, she decided firmly. So now she only had to find the item for her mission before anything else happened. On the 100th day since the phoenix hatched, the empire held a truly grand ball. The tables filled with wine and pastries stacked into towers nobody was ever going to eat. The delegations came down the stairs in their finest and looked around for exactly one thing. But upstairs, on a gold cushion, a small white bird sat glaring at absolutely nothing at all. She had failed to transform into a human. She had tried for an hour, and nothing had happened. Could it be, she thought, with both eyes opening slowly in the dark of that room, that there was something wrong with her, and there always had been, ever since heaven? Phoenix seemed unwell, the emperor said, coming in and crouching down beside her at once. Was she sick? He demanded of the room, and 3 servants went pale at the same moment. She lay on the yellow chair with the light across her back and did not move an inch. Where did it hurt? He asked her gently. Food would come soon, and she should rest beside him. Then a tray of small, colorful cakes arrived, and she sat up with considerable speed. Yes, she thought. Eat first, then think. Everything is always better after a proper meal. Lord Phoenix, said a maid, smiling as she set the snack down. Here was her treat for today. Somebody lifted her up into the air, and she made a noise of complete outrage about it. Then she went back to the plate and stopped objecting to anything at all after that. Pancakes with syrup, chocolate cake with cream, macarons, and a great many fresh strawberries. She seemed to have got her energy back, the emperor said, watching her with open happiness. She stood beside a cake among the yellow flowers, thoroughly pleased with her own life. She had eaten well, she thought. Now back to Richard's side, and then the floor tilted sideways. Why was this happening now? The world was spinning. Had there been alcohol in that snack? Then she understood exactly what this feeling was, and she had to get out of there immediately. Meanwhile, downstairs, an envoy raised both hands and announced that he had brought a present. Crusoe pulled the curtain aside to watch, and the whole staircase turned around to look. A hand closed around her wrist, and somewhere in that hall the mood shifted very slightly. The emperor looked up with the particular expression of a man who wanted to be elsewhere. Their kingdom also held birds sacred, the envoy explained, exactly as the empire did. And so they had brought a golden statue in the shape of a bird with jewels set for the eyes. A statue, the emperor thought. He really ought to have one made of phoenix as well. A phoenix sculpture would be considerably more impressive, he decided, entirely seriously. Then a servant came through the doors at a run, and his whole face changed at once. Phoenix, he said, looking at an empty chair with a gold cushion and nothing sitting on it. Out in the gardens, the hedges stood green and quiet in the warm afternoon light. A small white bird sat up in a tree with her wings out, thoroughly pleased with herself. Then she tried to take off again, and it did not go the way that it usually did. She had played and eaten so much she wheezed that flying had become genuinely difficult. Somebody sighed nearby, and she turned around on the branch to see who exactly it was. He was a rather handsome man, she conceded, watching the veiled envoy down on the steps. She hopped closer along the branch to get a better look at what he was doing down there. "Oh," he said, catching sight of her, and she preened a little at all the attention. "A quail," he said. She hit him across the cheek with one wing, which he had entirely and completely deserved. "Oh my," he said, delighted. Was she acting cute at him? How dare he call a holy bird a quail? Then something went through her again, and this time it was much stronger than before. He looked around the balcony, and something small went past his shoulder extremely fast. Two hands came up into the light, and they were not wings, and they were not small at all. She touched the trunk of a tree with fingers she had not used in 100 days. Now she only needed clothes from somewhere, and that was going to be a genuine problem. She could not possibly get caught like this, she thought, and dropped down into the grass. "Phoenix," called a voice from the garden path, and every part of her froze at once. She rolled into the flower bed as a bird again, with her heart going like a hammer. It was Richard. Of all the moments in 100 days, it was Richard, and it was right now. She had frightened him, he said, picking her up. She could not go off alone like that. "So this was the holy bird," the veiled envoy said, coming up the path behind him. "It was a genuinely cute bird," he added. "It even acted cute. It had patted his cheek." The temperature of that garden dropped, and the envoy realized he had said something wrong. The two men stood on the path, and only one of them understood what had just gone wrong. "Phoenix," the emperor said later, "shows affection to other people as well, apparently. She could not wander off to other humans," he told her. He did not know who was in his rooms. Perhaps, he thought, she was cleverer and more cunning than he assumed. We're all pets like this. "Your Majesty," said Crusoe from the doorway. The delegations were all waiting downstairs. She looked up at him from inside the cage with an expression of complete confusion. He was sorry for locking her up, he said very quietly. He would be back again very soon. He was definitely gone, she thought, listening to the door close at the end of the corridor. By now, opening a cage was easier for her than breathing, and she was out within seconds. Where, she wondered, walking across the carpet on 2 feet, was there a mirror in this room? It had been so long since she was human that she could not even remember her own face. She did not want to be mistaken for a pervert, so she borrowed Richard's clothes first. White cloth, bare feet on a red carpet, and one hand pulling the collar closed at the throat. The bird had been so very small that she had not been confident about any of this at all. She looked into the mirror and put one hand over her own mouth without meaning to do it. Richard would like her too, she thought. But what would he do when he learned what she really was? "Who are you?" the emperor said with a drawn sword between them. "Are you a high-ranking demon?" She was shaking so hard she could not answer him, and the tears came before the words did. The blade came up glowing between them, and the woman on his bed did not move at all. And later that night, a very small bird cried in the dark where nobody could hear her. But to understand how she ended up there, we go back a few hours, to a pair of gilded doors. Downstairs, the banquet was in full flow, and a man in medals was holding a glass he had not touched. The emperor stood against the red and looked out across a hall full of people he did not want. Delegations moved between the tables, and every one of them was watching where his eyes went. "Your Majesty," said Crusoe uncertainly, because something about that stare had become alarming. What exactly, he wondered, was the man looking at across the entire length of that hall? And then he saw it, and it could not possibly be true, and he nearly dropped his glass. Princess Melissa of the Kingdom of Barba, standing veiled and jeweled among the flowers. After she called Phoenix a quail, he had written the whole thing off. Had she actually appealed to him? He was going now, the emperor announced. He was tired. "Yes, Your Majesty," said Crusoe faintly. He should arrange another opportunity for the two of them, Crusoe thought, beaming to himself. Was a banquet truly this exhausting, the emperor wondered, walking into his own dark rooms? Then he stopped in the middle of the floor because something in that room was wrong. There was somebody lying in his bed, and the palace guard had not said a word about it. How exactly had they got in here, he thought, with one hand already moving toward his sword? Judging by the hair, it was a woman. The work of his ministers, perhaps, or something worse. Was it even alive, he thought, and then two red eyes opened and looked straight at him. She sat up and reached for him with both arms, which was the last thing he expected. She stopped because his face was not the face she had spent 100 days looking at. She pulled the blanket up and gripped it, and he watched her hands and thought about weapons. At the slightest hint of an attack, he told himself he would end this immediately. She was off the bed and across the room before he had finished making that decision. She was fast, he thought, far too fast, and then the balcony curtain was moving. What? He said out loud to an empty room. What in the world was that supposed to be? He pulled the curtain aside and found nothing but the night and the empty stone rail. Your Majesty, said Crusoe from the doorway, letting himself in. He would only be a moment. About the woman His Majesty had been staring at all evening in the banquet hall, if he might ask. Then he saw the drawn sword, and every thought about princesses left his head at once. Your Majesty, he shrieked, why is the sword out? Summon Viscount Crusoe and Earl Chad. There was an intruder in this room, the Emperor said. And there was something else. He was looking at the far corner where an ornate cage stood on a low marble table. His gloved hand closed on the bars, and there was nothing at all sitting on the cushion. Phoenix was gone, and the Emperor of Apollinarian went very quiet and very cold. From that hour there would be inspections at every residence in the palace grounds. An intruder, the nobles whispered. They said it might even be a high-ranking demon. However mighty the empire was, one of them said, there is no avoiding it with demons. Thanks to the wind, she had managed to transform back without being noticed by anybody. Though she thought she might have fainted for a moment, somewhere between the bed and the balcony. She had assumed Richard would recognize her at first glance. That had been the entire plan. Richard, she thought, watching him from the lamp with her feathers still shaking, is a fool. She did not want to be here, she decided, looking out at the moon from the cold step. She came down onto the floorboards of a dark room and folded her wings very carefully. She had managed to find somewhere with nobody around, which was harder than it sounds. A changing room, apparently, full of hanging clothes and baskets and quiet dusty air. That was good, because she had left her robe in Richard's room and her back was freezing. Controlling the transformation was still difficult, and something was making her weak. Perhaps it had been the alcohol in that cake, because she could not hold the bird shape. The clothes worn by the people with veiled faces, she decided, would do for the moment. She pulled a veil across her face, and her hands were still shaking as she tied it. She had been mistaken. From Richard's side of it, she must have looked like a total stranger. But it still hurt far too much, and the tears came through the veil anyway. Then somebody struck the door hard from the outside, and she went absolutely rigid. Somebody had come in. What was she supposed to do now? What if she was discovered here? Your Highness, said a woman's voice. Yes, said a man. Had she been waiting long? What was this, she thought from behind a rack of coats, watching two people find each other. She flattened herself against the wall while the pair of them walked past without looking. Somebody was kissing somebody, and she was 3 feet away, and she wanted to die. Wait, she thought, peering through the gap. But that man over there, that particular man, a quail, that was the man from the garden who had called her a quail to her face. She should have hit him considerably harder with her wing while she had the chance. Then her knees went, because the transformation had not finished with her yet. If she fell over from here, she thought with total clarity, everything was finished. Somebody is in here, the woman shrieked. He had said there was nobody in this room. She did not know when she was leaving, the woman announced, and left at a dead run. He had thought everyone went back to their quarters because of the guards, he muttered. Who is there? He said, turning around toward the racks with his shirt half undone. What was she supposed to do, she thought wildly. How does a person get out of this? Then he pulled the coats aside and found a veiled woman sitting on the floor. Dressed in barb attire, he thought, looking down at her. Was she one of Melissa's maids? She was doomed. She was completely doomed. There was no way out of this whatsoever. Oh, he said, crouching down, now that he was looking at her a little more closely. The veil moved, and something about the eyes behind it made him stop talking. Would she not reveal her identity even now? He asked, with genuine curiosity. Identity aside, he added, she owed him something for interrupting a very sweet moment. He had assumed it was a rat in here, he said, and she recognized that voice immediately. Then the door opened again, and the Crown Prince of Barb went entirely still. He had been told to return to his quarters, said the Emperor, standing between two guards. He was just about to leave, the prince said, and the Emperor did not blink at all. Flushed face, smudged lipstick, buttons undone in a room that was not his own. To do such things inside another man's imperial palace, the emperor observed quietly. He lacked dignity, he added, and walked past him without waiting for a response. On the floor behind the coats, a veiled woman lay absolutely still and did not breathe. The prince moved one step sideways so that the rack stood between her and the doorway. He apologized for the unsightly scene, he said. The lady was shy, so they should leave. The emperor looked at him for a moment longer than was comfortable, and then he smiled. He walked out through the lamplight, and the room let out a collective breath. The door closed, and the crown prince turned around toward the racks of clothing. Such insolence, he was saying, reaching out to pull the coats aside a second time. Hey you, he said. Because of her, he had very nearly been humiliated in front of. Something hit him across the face, and he went down between two coat racks. This impudence he managed from the floor. He still had no idea what had struck him. By the time he got up, the coats were swinging and the far window stood open. What? He said out loud. There had been a woman there. There had definitely been a woman. Where exactly, he demanded of an empty changing room, did she disappear to? Daring to call her a quail, she thought, flying hard over the moonlit roofs. A mere human. She regretted only one thing, which was not having hit him considerably harder. But now she needed to find her weapon, and she had no idea where it had ended up. What were they going to do about their phoenix? The servants asked. He would not harm her, surely. What if the intruder ate her? A maid wailed, and the library went entirely silent at that. That tiny phoenix, Crusoe said. Where would she even find food? She was barely a mouthful. Somebody put an arm around somebody else, and nobody in that room felt any better. Enough, said the housekeeper gently, and the whole conversation stopped where it stood. Upstairs, the emperor sat with one hand over his face and 3 servants standing well back. Somebody had infiltrated his bedroom, which was a serious threat by any measure at all. And then there was the phoenix, and every version of that thought ended somewhere terrible. He pressed his gloved hand harder against his eyes and did not let any of it show. The fact that a person got into the emperor's own chamber was a matter of state security. But the version he kept seeing was much smaller, and it involved blood on a marble floor. Still, Crusoe offered, Durahan might yet bring her back. He was an eagle of great war service. Durahan was certainly a clever bird, the emperor thought, and had always been useful to him. But this time something in him did not believe it, and he could not say why. It seemed unlikely to have been a demon at all, the court mage reported that afternoon. There were no traces of dark magic anywhere in that room, and there always are traces. Come to think of it, said a maid at the back, and the whole room turned to look at her. She had seen it last night. She had thought nothing of it, lying on the cushion like that. But it definitely had silver hair, she said, and the emperor looked up very slowly. That maid with the crown prince of Barb yesterday. Had she not also had silver hair? Bring the crown prince of Barb to me, he said, right now, and somebody ran for it. Why exactly? Timur asked, standing in the reception room. Is he looking for that maid? The emperor did not answer him, and the prince noticed that he was being ignored again. It was to check for similarities with the intruder, Crusoe explained, doing all the talking. Even for a powerful empire, Timur said, this was a shameless way to treat a foreign royal. Please answer truthfully, Crown Prince Timur, said Crusoe, and a hand hit the curtain. Most maids in Barbie have dark hair, the prince said. That one yesterday had brown hair. Is that so? Said Crusoe, in the voice of a man who did not believe one word of it. Should he bring the maids himself for confirmation? Timur offered, entirely too confidently. That would not be necessary, Crusoe said. The guards would go and check for themselves. Damn it, the prince thought, walking out. He was the one who wanted to find that woman. Since last night, no matter how hard he searched, she was nowhere to be found in that palace. Even among Melissa's maids, there had been nobody who looked remotely like her. She had covered her mouth with a veil, but those clear eyes stayed in his memory. Let them look for her, he decided. It would be entertaining to watch her suffer a little. Far to the north, in the Duchy of Moderland, the forest stood green under a clear sky. How many days had it been, she wondered. The aura here was right. This had to be the place. She should land and rest for a while because she genuinely felt she might die of exhaustion. This, she thought bitterly, is exactly why she had always envied the larger birds up there. She dropped down through the branches into a clearing full of quiet, moving light. She hopped across the grass on 2 ridiculous feet, looking for somewhere soft to collapse. She had been just about to rest, she complained, and what exactly was sparkling that much? Then she stopped. Sparkling. She turned around, and there it was, lying in the undergrowth. She made a noise that no dignified holy bird should ever make and launched herself at it. Light went up through the trees, and long silver hair came down through the middle of it. It had waited a long time, had it not, she said, closing one hand around her own staff. Her precious weapon, given to her by her master on the last day of 200 years. Invisible to everyone else, usable only by her, and entirely hers because of holy magic. Let us go back together, she said to it, smiling for the first time in several days. She opened one hand, and the light gathered in her palm the way it used to up in heaven. Now, she announced to the empty forest, she was ready to fight anything at any time. But then, she looked down at herself. Why exactly was she not changing back? Remember this, Haniel. After finding your staff, you must remain in human form for a period. She put both hands over her mouth, because she remembered that conversation perfectly well now. Exactly how long, she asked the trees, is a certain period supposed to last? Then something came out of the dark and went past her face close enough to cut. It buried itself in the trunk of an enormous hollow tree, glowing faintly blue. She went down on one knee in the leaves and stared at it. She knew that arrow. The shaft stood buried in the wood, humming, and the whole clearing had gone silent. Down on the forest road, a green carriage was moving fast between the trees. It was not going to work, somebody said. There were too many of them to handle here. A wheel went over the roots, and leaves came down across the road behind it. Please wait inside the carriage, said a blond man in a dark coat, drawing his sword. All right, said a woman's voice from inside. But he absolutely must be careful out there. Then somebody coughed, and a name was shouted, and the mood inside that carriage collapsed. Hold on a little longer, Leona, the woman said, holding a wounded knight against her. Her lips had clearly turned purple, and that only ever means one particular thing. Had she been poisoned by a demon? Haniel wondered, watching from among the trees. That arrow had come this way suddenly. Had it actually been aimed at those people? That knight's condition looked genuinely critical, and the blood had gone dark on her coat. Judging from the expressions of the other knights, all of them already knew it too. She stood there in the shadow of the trees with her staff in one hand and decided. If she left it like this, that woman was going to die inside the hour. She stepped out of the undergrowth, and a boot came down on the road in front of them. Who are you? A knight shouted, bringing his blade up between her and the carriage. She thought, genuinely puzzled. Why were all of them being so cautious with her? Now that she thought about it, her teacher had said humans respond warmly to a smile. So she smiled at them, and every single knight in that road took a step backward. But for people being hunted by demons, one of them muttered, her appearance was extraordinary. They could not keep running, a knight said. Lady Leona was hurt. They would fight here. When people put their guard up like that, said a voice from the trees, it makes her want to kill. She might attack at any moment, they thought, and formed a line in front of the carriage. Protect Her Majesty, somebody screamed, and the woman inside looked up sharply at that. Something came down out of the branches with its hand full of lightning. And a hand closed around a spear shaft, and the light in that forest changed color. How on earth, said the demon with the bow, staring at a staff that should not exist. She turned the gold in her palm over once and looked up at the thing in the tree. There were more of them behind the trunks, and not one of them knew what she was. How dare any of them attack people, she said directly in front of her, of all places. Then she was moving, and the knights on the road entirely lost track of where she went. It was impossible, the demon said. How could a human possibly move that fast? It drew again, aiming at the place where she had been standing a second earlier. It could not even see her anymore, it said. Where exactly had that woman gone? Up, she said from directly above it, and came down with the staff already swinging. She landed in the leaves, turned once, and the thing behind her did not get up again. This feeling, she thought, absolutely delighted. Beating demons really was her sort of thing. Reveal your identity, a knight demanded. Judging from her skills, was she an assassin? Stop, said the blonde man, putting one hand across the sword in front of her. If she were an assassin, he pointed out, she would have gone for their lives first. Inside the carriage, the wounded knight coughed into a glove and did not sit up again. Leona was getting worse. They would head to the village and then to the castle. Young lady, the woman said from the carriage door, come along with them. She wanted to repay the favor, but the injured came first, so they should all go together. So she somehow ended up going with them, sitting across from a woman dying of demon poison. She should heal her without being noticed, she thought. Was it all right to help? Her hand moved above the wound, and something warm passed between the two of them. At the very least, the woman opposite was thinking, those are clothes only royalty could wear. and there was no chance at all that she, the Empress of Apollinarian, would fail to notice that. They met and fell in love without knowing each other's identities, the former emperor and Scarlet. Their son was brilliant from a young age and showed exceptional talent with a sword. In her opinion, the reason that child had never met a girl was fairly straightforward. It was probably his temperamental nature, she said, and her attendants unfortunately agreed. In the constitution of this empire, the Empress holds the temple, and that is real power. When her precious son finally met somebody he loved, she wished only for his happiness, which was why she had been observing this particular young lady extremely carefully. This young lady was special. She was more beautiful than any woman Scarlet had ever seen. She was going to be a wonderful match for their Rishar, the Dowager Empress decided. How exactly did she fight the demons? She asked. Was the young lady a magic swordsman? And where did she come from? Why was she wandering alone through a forest like that? She apologized for asking so many questions, especially after being rescued by her. Something similar to a magic swordsman, Haniel said, and she had come from the West. Her master had told her that sometimes it is necessary to be flexible and lie a little. The West, said one of the ladies. The Queen of Sylvania was said to have silver hair. By any chance, Scarlet asked, leaning forward, was she from the kingdom of Sylvania? That is right, Haniel said, looking anywhere else. As expected, the whole carriage breathed. What were they to do about this? Scarlet said. She had caught an arrow to save them. Her delicate hands must be badly bruised, she added, and took both of them in hers. The demon's poison, she said slowly. It had not affected her at all, had it? Well, said Haniel, with both hands up and no plan whatsoever. That is to say, it was hereditary in her family, she managed at last, and smiled with total exhaustion. The Dowager Empress looked at her for a moment and something quietly clicked into place. Since ancient times, the Emperor and the Empress were the least safe from demons. Born with immunity to demon poison, and her necklace had not reacted, so not a demon. This, thought Scarlet watching her, must be destiny, and she began to make plans. It was already getting dark, and the local mage was busy preparing medicinal massages. Be careful with his words, a knight snapped. Did he not know His Majesty's decree? The conversation out there did not appear to be going well at all, Haniel noticed. She would step out for just a moment, she said, and slipped through the door. She stood in the corridor listening to two grown men argue about a massage schedule. With critically wounded patients here, they could not be treated because of that. Even the demons would hold their tongues at this, she thought, and then she froze. Because the woman on the couch had gone entirely still under her own blanket. She reached out and touched the wounded knight's hand, and the skin was cold. Still breathing, she thought, letting out a long breath. Thank goodness for that. But if things were left exactly like this, that woman was not going to see morning. What should she do, she thought, turning a ring over in her fingers in the dark. How could she save this person without revealing divine power in front of everybody? Keep one thing in mind, Haniel, her master had said once. Humans will always buy medicine. Yes, she thought, straightening up. There is in fact a method available to her here. All she had to do was convince them a plant was a herb and let her power run through it. All preparations were complete. Now all she had to do was behave completely shamelessly. I am a drug dealer, she muttered, walking down the corridor with a weed in one hand. She stopped outside the door where the lamplight came through and squared her shoulders. Two people turned around at the sound and found her standing there looking determined. Oh, young lady, said the knight. Madam, is the carriage door broken? Said somebody else. Pay no attention to that man, Scarlet said. Why had she suddenly come outside? If they waited any longer, the patient would die, Haniel said, and the corridor went quiet. And it did not appear that this lord's mage intended to provide any treatment at all. So then, said Scarlet. Calm down, Haniel thought. Do this as shamelessly as possible. Fortunately, she announced, holding up a weed, she happened to be carrying excellent medicine. That, thought the Dowager Empress, is a tone of voice she had definitely heard somewhere before. On her last visit to the continent, a traveling medicine seller had used exactly that tone. She was not showing this to just anyone, Haniel said. It was a precious family heirloom herb. But those eyes seemed to be telling the truth. It healed wounds inflicted by demons. Faster than magic, she added, and with absolutely no side effects whatsoever. Was it not working, she wondered, watching the woman's face? Then perhaps... It was fine if they did not want it, she said, turning away. It could not be bought with money. She would buy it, Scarlet said at once, and grabbed her sleeve before she could take a step. She begged her, the lady said, and a dowager empress of an empire said please to a stranger. The house stood in the dark with its windows lit and the stars out over the roof. The herbal infusion was ready, somebody announced, bringing in a bowl of something green. Now all that remained was to pour divine power into it without anybody seeing her do it. And to try as hard as possible not to be caught, she thought, very carefully indeed. She lifted the spoon to the mouth of a woman who had already stopped responding. She was glad she still had adjustment time left because she could not watch somebody die. It should be working by now, she thought, and everybody in that room stopped breathing. Scarlet put both hands over her mouth and the color came back into the woman's face. The knight on the bed lay still for a moment longer with the lamplight across her. Then her eyelids moved, and somebody behind Haniel made a small, strangled sound. She sat up slowly, pressed one hand to her forehead, and looked around the room. Somebody crossed that floor at a speed no noblewoman should be capable of achieving. "Leona, are you all right?" "Yes," she said. In fact, she felt as though she had more energy. "Unbelievable," said a knight. Not one scar was visible. A wizard would have taken far longer. That, thought Haniel, entirely failing to look modest, is what her power can do. A pair of boots crossed the floorboards and stopped directly in front of her. The knight she had healed was on her feet already, and she had come to ask a question. She stood there in a blood-stained coat facing a silver-haired woman who had saved her. "What is it?" Haniel asked, taking a step back with genuine alarm on her face. "Thank you for saving her life," the knight said, and asked to repay the favor with dinner. The table came out loaded with roast chicken and steak and soup and a great deal of bread. She could not possibly have missed a meal like this one, she thought, biting into it. "Please try this as well, my lady," somebody said, and put more food in front of her. Then she stopped chewing because something had gone through her without any warning. Her hand hovered over the soup bowl and did not pick up the spoon at all. She was missing him. That was what this was. She was missing that ridiculous man. Far away in a palace, a blonde man sat with one hand resting on an empty perch. The kindness of treating strangers with precious herbs, Scarlet thought, walking home. And the elegance in every single movement. She was certainly the daughter of a queen. And anyone with eyes could see that this young lady was a successor to an empress. Now, she thought, how exactly does a mother link the two of them together? Son, she demanded the next week, had he genuinely gathered only suitable ladies this time? How does one convince a man that stubborn, she wondered, watching him walk away. She wanted to connect that girl with their Richard, and she was going to find a way. "Did you hear about it?" somebody said in a tavern. What nonsense was it this time? No, it was real. The imperial palace had formally begun the empress selection process. The position had stood vacant for far too long, and the whole empire had noticed. "The selection process," somebody repeated and smiled at something nobody else could see. "Of the empress," said a woman in green with her hands folded and her eyes shining. He was not neglecting his work, Crusoe said, but he was far more worried than he looked. The phoenix really had been very important to him, the housekeeper said, watching the door. Or perhaps it was because the empress's position was still standing empty. That must be it. He had hoped His Majesty would connect with somebody from a delegation, and then this happened. In a time as chaotic as this one, he decided, His Majesty needed words of encouragement. So he arranged his face into something supportive and walked into the study anyway. "Your Majesty, the position of Empress cannot remain empty. They must publish the notice." He did not want to listen to him anymore, said the Emperor without looking up at all. With an Empress, his position would be more solid, Crusoe pressed, and the Phoenix might return. He always says nonsense, the Emperor thought, pressing one hand across his own mouth. Then he sat very still for a while, looking at something nobody else in that room could see. Now that he had lost her, he thought, everything in that palace had gone strangely quiet. Meanwhile, far to the north, a woman in green was gesturing wildly in a wooden room. "Miss," she was saying, "what on earth is the matter with you all of a sudden?" Was she telling her that Richard was looking for a wife? Haniel said, very slowly indeed. She was right here, she thought furiously, and he intended to marry somebody else. "That," said Scarlet with one hand over her mouth. "Miss, by any chance, might she ask—" "Did she happen to know His Majesty the Emperor personally?" she asked, extremely carefully. "That is right," Haniel said, rubbing her forehead. She knew that man very well indeed. "How exactly?" Scarlet said, turning around. "Does she know him quite that well? Where and how did they meet?" The only reason Richard went west was to hunt demons. And then a thought arrived, and the Dowager Empress of the Empire lost her composure. He went to deal with demons, she thought. and won the love of a beauty out there as well. This was an opportunity she could not waste, since this girl was clearly destined for him. The young lady seemed very close to the emperor. Yes, Haniel said, he was kind and attentive. Rishar was kind, Scarlet repeated. That boy, the one everybody in the empire calls cold. Mother, he had said only last month, he had no intention of meeting anybody to be empress. Now she understood why he had refused so hard. He had been waiting for this girl all along. A man who leaves behind the woman he loves because of his position and then goes back. And a woman who missed him so much that she left the West to come and find him. If that was what happened, then as Rishar's mother, she had to help them find each other. This lady had changed her manner, Haniel thought. Had she realized that she had lied? She can be with Rishar if she comes back to the imperial palace with her, Scarlet decided. Miss, she asked, taking both her hands, do you want to marry His Majesty the Emperor? Of course she did, Haniel said. Rishar was her one and only companion in this world. If you see somebody naked, she added, obviously you must take responsibility for it. Do you not believe her? She demanded. Well, said Scarlet faintly, if he had already seen it. She was definitely going to marry Rishar, she announced, and give him a great many children. But, she said, and then sat straight down on the floor with all the fight going out of her. He was in the middle of choosing a wife. She had wanted a happy family like the other divine beings. Why was love always this difficult for her? She asked the floorboards. Why was she always alone? Do not worry, miss, said Scarlet, crouching down beside her among the candles. If it was true that she had a deep relationship with His Majesty, then let her help. Really? Haniel said, looking up with her hands clasped. Could she really help her? Of course, just trust her. She happened to know Duke Greta and a great many other people. With this, Scarlet thought serenely, she would be able to repay the favor she owed. Haniel stared at her with an expression of total and unguarded astonishment. Let us return to the imperial palace, she said. She would make her a candidate for empress. The selection was announced across the country, sealed in gray envelopes with a red hawk. Your Majesty, said Crusoe, it is time to move on to the next item on the schedule. He felt a little guilty about it, he admitted, but he was only doing what had to be done. By the way, Count, said Chad in the corridor, why did Her Majesty halt the search? Not sure, Crusoe said, and the two of them walked on between the columns for a while. At first they had assumed it was the work of high-ranking demons breaking into the palace. But the chief wizards insisted there was no trace of them anywhere in that chamber. In this empire, there are wizards who research everyday magic and publish about it. And there are magic swordsmen who put that same power into a blade and go to war. And then there is the one they call a swordmaster, and there has only ever been one. So then who could it possibly be? Crusoe said, stopping at the foot of the stairs. Perhaps, Chad said, and did not finish the sentence for several long seconds. Was it the rebel forces after all, he said. It had been quiet, but that never lasts. At times like this, the palace needed a thorough search to check for spies among them. Security had been reinforced, but nobody was certain what His Majesty was thinking. The Phoenix's disappearance had left the Emperor deeply saddened, and it showed. Still, Crusoe said, they should not worry too much. They would observe for a while yet. And above all, he added, brightening, they were busy preparing the Empress selection. Even the heads of the 5 dukedoms appeared to have been waiting for this moment. Greta of the Falcon, Dossman of the Owl, Pierre of the Eagle, who never let anyone forget it, Westporting Dawn of the Dove, and Moderland of the Swan, and every one of them ready. Everybody was filled with joy, Crusoe said, and Chad wondered where the sparkles came from. By the way, had the Westportington family not recently welcomed a daughter into the house? So the only one missing was Greta, which meant there ought to be 4 candidates. Did Lord Chad think Greta might not put anybody forward at all? Crusoe asked. It was the house that produced the last empress, and everybody remembered how that ended. Shall they make a bet on it then? Crusoe said, and Chad declined to answer that. Elsewhere, a golden cup came down hard on a table in a very quiet room. Scarlet, said the man holding it. What exactly did she just say to him? Liam Greta, head of the Greta family, and the older brother of a dowager empress. She was asking for the lady she brought to be presented as a candidate for empress. Their family had already produced 1 empress. It looked like ambition, and it was unwise. My lord, she said, kneeling in front of him, the lady she brought is already His Majesty's lover. His Majesty has a lover, Liam repeated, and set the cup down very carefully indeed. Yes. It had been a chance encounter, and she had learned about this unfortunate love. And as a mother, she asked, how could she possibly turn a blind eye to that? Scarlet had been compassionate since she was small, and he had never once cured her of it. She should not trust people recklessly, he said. He found this lover story suspicious. She knew, she said, but the girl was trustworthy, and Herodion had agreed with her too. Herodion agreed as well, Liam said. Had she at least verified the lady's identity? Of course. She would vouch for her personally, so he did not need to worry about anything. Which was why she was asking a favor. Present her as a distant relative from the countryside. She would stay and prove it herself, but she and Herodion had to find that thing quickly. My lord will understand, she said. Whatever the truth is, criticism will come later anyway. Still, Scarlet, he said, seeing her smile that brightly made him curious about the girl. Guide him, he said. He intended to see this lady with his own eyes before agreeing. Haniel, greet the lord, said Scarlet. He is the Duke of the Greta family, one of 5. The girl turned around in a pale blue dress, and Liam Greta forgot what he was going to say. She smiled at him in the soft light of that room, and the whole argument ended there. Nice to meet you, your grace, she said. I am Haniel. Please take care of me from now on. What in the world, she thought, staring at the table with actual tears in both eyes. What was happening? She was so happy that she genuinely felt she might pass out. These were the foods she had been curious about every time Richard ate in front of her. But seriously, she thought, pausing with one hand halfway to a plate of something. It was all right to eat this, was it not? Nobody had told her otherwise, so she began. She wondered whether she could eat exactly like Richard did. Something like this. She lifted a piece to her nose, and her entire face changed at the smell of it. Did it suit her taste, Miss Haniel? Asked the lady across the table. Yes, very much. Try this as well, she said, pushing another plate across, and Haniel did not argue. If she thought about it, there was probably no better way available to her than this one. And she could check whether there truly was a high-ranking demon hidden among the ministers. Thank you for the delicious meal, she said, setting down the glass. She would excuse herself. If demons really were hiding in that palace, she thought, they had to be removed entirely. Surely, Liam was thinking, Scarlet's guest deserves to have her status guaranteed. If you do not give a surname, you are either very lowborn or you are royalty. She must be a royal hiding her identity, he decided. As soon as the sun rose, call the tailor. The woman believed Scarlet was a merchant, so they would simply dress her properly. The next morning, a carriage came up the drive with 2 horses and a great deal of luggage. A pair of shoes came down onto a wooden step, followed by a large flat case. Long time no see, your majesty, said a red-haired woman in glasses, bowing very low. Narnia, listen carefully, Scarlet hissed. The woman upstairs must never learn who she is. What, said Narnia. All right, for now. That, said Scarlet, was a very good answer. Was there anybody in the capital who did not know the Dowager Empress's face, she wondered. Were they from the countryside, Narnia thought, looking out over the garden. Well, it hardly mattered to her either way, she decided, and smiled at nothing. Since she had chosen loyalty to the former Empress over every other candidate offered, she would stake her own name on it as the finest designer in the entire capital. Narnia, said Scarlet from the doorway of an upstairs room, that is the woman. What exactly was it going to be, Narnia thought, and then she stopped breathing. The girl turned around by the window, and the sunlight came through the glass behind her. Oh, said Narnia when her voice came back. That, yes, that would do nicely. Hello, she said, bowing. Her name was Narnia, and she had come to make the young lady's dress. Haniel sat down in front of her in a dark blue dress and waited to be measured. Nice to meet you, Narnia, she said, and the designer thought, this one can be Empress. So then, Narnia thought, walking around her twice. After all, she supposed. Pink to detonate the loveliness, perhaps, or light blue to maximize the innocence. Or white, which every gossip magazine claimed was His Majesty's stated ideal. Which one would the lady like to choose? She asked, holding up 3 separate bolts. Said Haniel, folding her arms and considering the whole question seriously. White is a color that symbolizes angels, she thought, so that one was slightly awkward. Oh my, said Narnia when the girl pointed. Was she genuinely choosing that color? Yes, Haniel said, smiling. She liked that one, so they should please use it. It was a very unexpected choice, Narnia admitted, and the girl only smiled wider. But then who was she? The best designer in the Empire. The impossible becomes possible. She would make this girl the main character of that entire selection at a single stroke. Elsewhere, two young men were laughing at their sister across a breakfast table. "Father," one of them said, "is Rachel supposed to be a maid? Did she know how to hold a teacup?" "Your Grace," said Rachel, standing up. She was furious, but Noah and Noel were right. She was destined to become a knight, not a maid, and she asked him not to trample that. "Miss Haniel," said a voice from a room full of black wood and gold. "Come here a moment." A blue skirt with white lace at the hem came down onto the tiled floor of the hall. "Hello," she said, smiling. Her name was Haniel Finesso, apparently, as of this morning. She was from Sylvania or Silvernia, and they had all decided she was a princess of it. "Nice to meet you, my lady," said a brown-haired girl, bowing. Her name was Rachel Mays. Even now, becoming a maid was not her dream at all, but there were other considerations. "Mays is going as a maid," Liam explained, "but she should think of her as an escort knight." "Come now, sit down quickly," somebody said and pulled her toward the couch by one hand. Once she became a knight, Rachel thought, every person who ignored her would remember it. "Excuse him," said a young man sitting down beside her, rather closer than necessary. She touched one ear because something in this room had gone very strange very fast. Two blonde heads leaned toward each other and conferred urgently about something. "Please feel free to call her Haniel," she said, and both of them made a small noise. "Tsk," said their father from his chair. They were still exactly the same as ever. Were they planning on not even saying hello, he asked. "Noel." "Noah. Both of you." "I am Noah Greta," said one of them. "My name is Noel Greta," said the other faintly. "Nice to meet you," she said. "I am Haniel." And she smiled at both of them at once. Something hit the floor nearby, and she jumped about 6 inches on the couch. One of them had put a foot straight through a small table without noticing it. He would take his leave, he announced, going red to the ears, and left at speed. "Brother," said the other one, staring after him with his whole face changing color. Then he smiled at her in a way that convinced nobody in that room of anything. He would also go, he said, and fled. Neither brother could explain what frightened them. "Hey, wait just a moment," somebody said, and a hand closed on an empty door frame. The door slammed, and Haniel sat there with one hand still raised to say goodbye. Had she done something wrong, she asked the room with genuine worry on her face. "Leave them alone, Miss Haniel," Liam said. "Put those two in front of a woman in a dress." "By the way, Your Grace," Rachel said, "is Miss Haniel entering as the Greta candidate?" That was right, he said. He would not go so far as to call it a confrontation, but he looked out of the window for a while and did not finish that sentence either. "Anyway," he said, "one of those women is going to become the empress of this empire." Excellent, Haniel thought. She would use this to become Risher's partner officially. "Huh?" she said out loud, and everybody in the room turned to look at her. "Right then, Miss Haniel," Rachel announced, standing up. She simply had to become empress. "That Chloe from the Dossman Duchy and Rosalind from Moderland." "Who?" said Haniel. "That is right," Liam said. "There is a person who believes she is the prettiest alive." "Well," he added with a small, unsettling smile, "it appears that ends today." "Wait for it, Rosalind," Rachel shouted and hugged the nearest available person. Elsewhere in that house, a young man sat down hard and said his heart was still pounding. "His, too," said the other one. What on earth exactly was that woman supposed to be? She had not really seemed like a human being at all. Then what was she instead? "Perhaps," one of them said. "No, surely not." "An angel," said the other, and both laughed. "Please take care of me," she had said, and neither of them had recovered since. Two pairs of boots walked out onto the patterned floor of the upper corridor. "His brother had looked like a genuine idiot back there," one of them said. "However," said the other, stopping at the window, "if Miss Haniel were to end up standing beside His Majesty the Emperor, with the imperial hawk over both of them, would the two of them not look absolutely perfect together, exactly like a painting?" The attendants of the Sapphire Palace had not sat down properly in over a week. They were run off their feet, and in the middle of all that chaos, the arguments began. "They were going to keep this old-fashioned process exactly as it is," somebody demanded. "They only had records from a few hundred years ago," another said, "so there was nothing to do." However traditional it was, the circumstances of the age had to be taken into account. And there was 100% chance that His Majesty would not like it either. A heavy book came down on a table, and the argument ended for the afternoon. "That would be all for today," said the chairman, and nobody looked especially relieved. "Let them all prepare properly without thinking about anything else," Chad told the room, because the real question underneath all of it was which family would produce the empress. "The meeting should be over by now," Crusoe said, coming down the corridor with a smile. They had surely fought an enormous mental battle behind extremely friendly faces. By the way, Your Majesty, he added, he had done a little research on the candidates. The Emperor read his papers and radiated a cold that Crusoe pretended not to feel. The Greta family had also put forward a candidate. Was he genuinely not curious about that? Well, said Katrine unexpectedly, she was curious about the Greta candidate herself. The Greta candidate was a distant relative brought in from the countryside, apparently. Catherine, said Crusoe, what did she know about meddling? She knew Duke Greta better than him. Such arrogance, he said, smiling in the way that meant somebody was about to be challenged. Shall they give it a try then, he said, and the housekeeper squared up to him immediately. Enough, said the Emperor, without raising his head from the page in front of him. Both of them stopped where they stood, and the whole room felt the temperature drop. Get out, he said, and they went, and neither of them said anything on the way. Outside the door, the housekeeper sat down on the floor in her black dress. Inside, a gloved hand came to rest on the bars of an empty cage on the tiles. The silence felt unfamiliar now, and the empty space in that room felt suffocating. The reason he had always liked silence was that walking alone had been familiar to him. All of that was a thing of the past, and he had not agreed to the change at any point. Ever since she came to him, he could not even imagine himself without her anymore. Far across the city, Silver Hair moved in the light of an upstairs window. She sat in the window frame of a grand room with the trees pressing against the glass. The merchant couple had left, and the house felt considerably larger without them. She was sorry, the lady had said. She had wanted to stay with her until the very end. They had seemed extremely rushed about something, and neither of them explained it. There were certainly a great many people around those two, she thought, looking at the stars. She had felt exactly this in heaven as well, watching everybody else fly in groups. The loneliness does not go away simply because the room around you is full of people. Was she a loner who belongs nowhere at all, she wondered? She missed Richard terribly. Still, tomorrow she would officially meet him, so this melancholy would end then. And then something turned over inside her and she was suddenly very small again. Then she could go and see Richard right now, she thought, with her wings already open. She went out of the window into the night before anybody could tell her not to. She crossed the dark city with the stars over her and the palace lights ahead of her. He was lying awake in his own bed with the curtains half drawn and one lamp lit. Then something changed in the room and he closed his eyes without opening them again. Silver Hair came down through the dark, and a woman bent over the edge of that bed. She stood there in a blue dress with the light gathering quietly all around her. A hand came down onto her shoulder, and the whole room filled up with soft light. She raised both arms, and something enormous and gentle began to happen in that room. When a divine being takes back the wand, they say the form is fixed for a certain period. And she had a horrible suspicion out there in the dark that the period had now passed. What if she could not turn into a human this time? What then? What exactly then? What if she could not attend the Empress selection while looking like this at all? Phoenix, he would say, this is my wife, chosen properly through the selection process. No, she thought, climbing hard through the snow above the rooftops of the old city. That was important, certainly. But for right now, there was something else instead. Right now, she simply missed him, and the window of his room was standing open again. She liked that about him, but what exactly did he intend to do about burglars? If she was caught in here, it would definitely get noisy, so she erased her presence first. Everything in that room was the same. The desk still buried under its documents. Her cage still standing open on the marble exactly the way he always left it for her. And then, of course, the most handsome face in the entire world, asleep on the pillow. He was still bright, she thought. So bright that it was difficult to look directly at him. She landed on the covers beside his hand and stood there for a long moment without moving. I miss you, Richard, she said, in a voice too small for any human being to hear. He slept on without stirring, and a very small white shape crept closer to his face. That cushion, she thought, spotting it, and something in her went completely still. Because she had missed him, and it turned out that he had been missing her as well. She lay down flat on the floor beside the bed and let the exhaustion take her over. Then a hand of light reached out toward him, with feathers gathering all around it. She was sorry, she told him. She had wanted to come back to him quickly and could not. She would be chosen as Empress, she promised him. She had not decided when to tell him the truth. And she was absolutely never going to let go of that particular body, she added. Wait just 2 more days, Richard, she said, and then she would come and see him again. So please wait a little longer for her, she said, backing toward the open window. She would definitely come back and stand in front of him. She promised him that. Then she went out over the towers with the stars burning above the palace roof. Behind her, in the dark of that room, something white turned its red eyes toward the bed. Morning came in through the open window with the leaves moving against the glass. He woke slowly, sitting up, looking at his own hand as though it belonged to somebody else. He felt refreshed after a long time. How long had it been since he slept that deeply? Today as well, he thought, tying his collar, the phoenix had not come back to him. Then he stopped in the middle of the room, and his whole expression changed at once. On the table lay a single leaf and a single bean, and yesterday there had been nothing there. His hand came down and touched them, and he already knew exactly what they meant. Something closed in his throat, and he stood there holding onto the edge of the table. "Phoenix," he said, turning toward the cage with his voice cracking on the word itself. He crossed the room in 3 strides and put his hand against the empty bars of it. She had come and gone while he was sleeping. She had been right here, in this room. But how, he thought. He was a swordmaster. How had he not noticed her presence at all? No, none of that mattered now. He lifted the cage carefully off the marble floor. The fact that she was alive somewhere was enough for him. It was more than enough. He looked away toward the window with his jaw set hard against everything else. Elsewhere that morning, somebody was shouting 2 names across a bright green garden. Noah, Noel. The 2 of them turned around between the hedges with identical expressions. Rachel, one of them said. She was not busy right now, was she? So she needed their help. What? Suddenly said the other. Was it urgent? Because it certainly looked urgent. It was absolutely urgent, and it was absolutely important, she said, and grabbed a sleeve. A red waistcoat was hauled sideways by one arm before its owner finished objecting. Stop talking and follow her quickly, she said, and dragged both brothers down the path. Hey, Rachel, at least tell them where they were going. What on earth had happened? 3 of them arrived at a carved door with a great deal of undignified stumbling. From now on, she told them, you shall address her as your Imperial Majesty. Understood. What? Said one of the brothers. Was she seriously asking the 2 of them to commit treason? Think simply, she said, with both hands flat against the doors. If you were the Emperor. 2 blonde heads looked at each other in the light coming down from the high windows. Inside that room, silver hair moved, and somebody was smiling among the white flowers. How exactly did they think they would feel, she asked, the moment Haniel appeared. A gilded room with white columns had been turned into a dressing hall for the morning. 3 pairs of polished shoes stood on the tiles, waiting for a door to open again. So, she said, coming out in yellow with the roses behind her, what did they think? Both brothers looked at her, and one of them put a hand across his mouth immediately. They were doing it again, she said, ignoring the question and saying absolutely nothing. Even though they were his sons, Liam thought, he never expected them to be this hopeless. Good for nothing, fellows, she said, standing over the pair of them with folded arms. Why did they always do this? It made her feel awful, and it was not once or twice either. Fine. She would change clothes and come back out wearing something completely different. Hey, said Rachel, rounding on them. Tell her what you think. Please give the woman an answer. What would they think, she demanded, if the 2 of them happened to be His Majesty? It felt like he was going to have a heart attack, one of them said, holding his own throat. You too, said Rachel to the other. Honestly, neither of them was being very helpful. She is pure and cute and pretty, said Liam slowly, but something is still lacking. What if, said Rachel, pulling at her collar with her eyes going very wide indeed. What if it was the wretched Rosalind Motterland who walked out in front of her instead? Everybody in that room turned around, and nobody moved for several long seconds. A hand came up to a throat, and the whole idea settled over the room like cold water. With those clothes, she said, there was no possible way to compete against Rosalind. Rachel, said one of the brothers, backing away from her. Rachel, wait a moment. Put on the next outfit and come out right away, she shouted through the dressing door. Since she was in charge of Miss Haniel, losing to Rosalind was simply unacceptable. It had to be beautiful enough to flatten every nose in the room the moment they saw it. Then heels came down on the tiles and a woman in deep red walked out of that doorway. The words stopped in Rachel's mouth halfway through whatever she had been saying. Liam Greta stood with his hands behind his back and simply looked at her for a while. One brother shut his eyes, clenched both fists, and appeared to be in genuine pain. Indeed, Liam thought. Now he understood why Scarlet was so determined about this candidate. She stood there in scarlet silk with the light gathering along the whole length of it. Then she looked up, calm as anything, and waited for somebody to say a single word. This is it, Haniel, Rachel cried, seizing both her hands. It was absolutely beautiful. If Rachel liked it, then she liked it as well, she said, and the whole room brightened. She would compliment His Majesty well, Liam said if she were standing at his side. She smiled with her eyes closed, and none of them knew what they were looking at. Then he stood up, and the three of them turned toward him on the patterned floor. The old man would excuse himself now, he said, so they should go ahead and talk properly. The words they could not say before, he said, and everything about their behavior until now. And behaving like clumsy fools was a disgrace to the Greta family name, was it not? The door came open hard behind him, and then the three of them were alone in there. What should they do, brother? One of them whispered. Why did he not start the conversation? Noah! Noel! She called, coming across the room. Was this outfit not completely perfect? Both of them looked at each other, and both of them turned an identical shade of red. That is, said one, and then stopped. Said the other, and stopped as well. She waited, watching them, with her red eyes absolutely steady above that scarlet dress. You are so beautiful, one of them managed finally, with his hand across his mouth. Miss Haniel, said the other, bowing his head. He was sorry. The truth was, they were shy. She covered her mouth with one hand and stared at the pair of them in astonishment. They had not been avoiding her on purpose, he said. They were only like this before a dress. Two brothers stood together under the light and waited to hear what she would say. That was all. He was truly sorry, he said, and did not raise his head from the floor. It was all right, she said, and both of them looked up at once at the sound of it. The goddess said that if you truly repent, then you will be forgiven for it afterward. Goddess, said one of them, staring at her with his whole expression coming apart. So she would forgive the two of them as well, she said, and put out one hand toward them. They had even shaken hands now, so they were completely reconciled. Agreed. Yes, yes. Oh, she added, turning back with only half of that smile visible. One more thing. She was not going to put up with it a second time, so she hoped they would never ignore her again. Yes, understood, said two young men of the Greta family, standing very straight indeed. Far to the south there is a duchy abundant with every kind of jewel in the world. A vast expanse of land, wealth upon wealth, and a family never once refused anything. In order to get what they wanted, they were willing to do absolutely anything at all. That evening, a red-haired girl sat brushing her hair in front of a silver dressing table. Brother, she said without turning around, Thierman, the eldest son of that house. What did he think? Was it beautiful enough to captivate His Majesty the Emperor himself? Of course, he said. There was no woman more beautiful in the kingdom, as he had said 5 times. Well, said Rosalind Motterland, smiling, it always feels good to be told you are beautiful. The twins came in behind him, offering to tell her how pretty she was as well. She was going to make Chloe Dosman cry tomorrow. One of them laughed. That unlucky girl. She knew, she said, with a face that ugly, and would crying tomorrow make her uglier still. Brother, she said then, in a voice that changed the temperature of the room. That is enough. Would Rosalind really be friends with somebody like that? It genuinely hurt his pride. Just leave the girl alone, she said. She needs to hit rock bottom entirely on her own. She stood up with her fan open and the shadows of her brothers gathering behind her. When there is a candidate she does not like, she said, they can take care of everything. Far away that same night, a clock struck the hour beside a girl who was not asleep. She sat up in bed in a pale blue nightdress with her eyes wide open in the dark. Why on earth was it like this? Why on earth was it doing this to her tonight? The time was not passing. She lay flat on the floor and glared at the ceiling. Tomorrow was the day she went to the palace. She only had to get through this one night. Then her eyes filled up and the tears came down before she understood why at all. She missed Richard so much, she said into the bedding, and cried until she could not breathe. Then she sat bolt upright. Wait, hold on a minute. Why exactly was she crying about this? If you miss him, she thought, then simply go and see him. Exactly like you always did. Just wait a little while longer, Richard, she said, already halfway across the floor. Something folded over on the tiles, and a blue nightdress collapsed into empty cloth. A very small white shape climbed out of it with its red eyes fixed on the window. Then a light went up over the house on the hill and crossed the whole night sky. In the palace, a man in a white shirt stopped in the middle of his own drawing room. Something moved at the edge of his vision, and he turned toward the window slowly. A star, he thought. Then he looked again, and it was coming straight down at him. Phoenix, he said, and the word came out of him without any permission whatsoever. He went down on one knee among the flowers with both hands already reaching out. She was finally back, he said, and his whole face changed in a way nobody ever saw. Then she hit him in the chest at full speed, and the impact folded him in half. "Phoenix!" he wheezed from the floor. Her strength. What exactly had happened to her strength? "But still," he said, gathering her up in both hands, "thank you for coming back to him." She talked at him without stopping, and he sat there listening to every syllable of it. Did she really have that much to say? He would listen to all of it, he said, but first. Shall they look at the newly made cage? The chief wizard of the palace worked hard on it. A magical cage, she thought, and every feather on her body stood straight up at once. "Phoenix," he said, because something white had gone very still in the palm of his hand. She could not be caught like this, she thought. Did he know how hard she had worked for tomorrow? "Now wait just a minute," he said with one hand raised, but the window was already open. Then there was only moonlight on the iron and a room with nobody at all inside it. She was sorry to leave him alone like this, she thought, going out across the roofs. The next morning, a green carriage stood waiting in a courtyard with 3 men beside it. Haniel called Rachel up the stairs. Was she ready? Everything down here was finished. Yes, she answered from somewhere above them. She would be right out in a moment. Light came through the blue glass of the high windows and lay across the hall floor. Then heels came down on the tiles, and every head in that courtyard turned at once. She was ready, she said, smiling in red silk. "Let us go, to the imperial palace." The palace maids had been run off their feet ever since the announcement went out. They prepared the Sapphire Palace, and they went through every candidate's documents twice. By the time it was finished, the carriages had begun arriving at the gates one by one. A maid went down to the drawing room with her whole face full of anticipation. The Greta family had not arrived yet, she told them, so please enjoy the tea meanwhile. Then she stopped in the doorway, because every single woman in there was wearing white. A red-haired girl sat on the couch with a teacup and looked down into it for a while. She never imagined all of them would wear white dresses. It was genuinely disappointing. Foolish people, she thought. What exactly changes in you because of a dress like that? Simplicity can shine, certainly, but only if you have a beautiful face, just like hers. She already knew Chloe Dosman would appear, so that particular one was no surprise. What surprised her was the boldness of the rest of them walking in one after another. From their appearance, there was no need to watch any of them very closely at all. How had they even thought of running for Empress looking the way they did, she wondered. Yenneca West Portington, the adopted daughter of the Duke of that house, sat by the window. She was as tall as a hawk with a strong face, and such women are never chosen. And Griffany of the Pierre Duchy carried a dangerous air that did not read as maturity. How could she not feel comfortable, she thought, hiding a laugh behind her fingers? "Excuse her," she said aloud. She had a quick question, if that was permitted. Did anybody know when the talented candidate of the Greta family intended to arrive? It was not precise, the maid said, smiling, but she had heard the lady would come soon. Well then, she would simply have another cup of tea, and she held out the saucer. She could not believe the woman had still not arrived after all this waiting. The palace was not far. Was she late deliberately in order to arrive last and be seen? The Greta family had been unlucky ever since the late Empress, she added pleasantly. Since it had already come to this, said somebody else, she would simply go with the flow. They were supposed to be meeting His Majesty, and this woman was extremely late. Time mattered a great deal here, Rosalind said. And what did Lady Chloe think about it? Here we go again, thought the blue-haired girl, and set her cup down very carefully. Her status was low anyway, Rosalind said. There are a great many like her, even in places like this. Was a pretty face truly all she had? She really ought to care about elegance instead. Then a voice spoke from the doorway, and the whole room turned toward the sound of it. The Empress candidate of the Greta family had arrived, said the man standing there. Greta, thought the blue-haired girl. The family of the late Empress herself. That family. Were they saying that House had produced another candidate after everything that happened? Indeed, said a dark-haired woman on the blue couch, without any warmth at all. What kind of person was she? Rosalind wondered, resting her chin on one gloved hand. Boots came across the patterned floor, and they were not the boots of a noblewoman. A brown-haired girl in a green skirt walked straight in through the carved doors. A man in the corner turned around, and the whole room watched her cross the carpet. A hand went up to a mouth. Somebody laughed before she could stop herself entirely. Green eyes swung around toward the sound, and the laughing stopped immediately. She was only surprised, Rosalind said, and she had already decided what to do about it. The lady was so energetic that she took her for a knight rather than a future empress. Rachel Mays smiled back at her, and behind them a young man watched without blinking. Of course, she said. She had come as a guardian knight. The Greta candidate was not her. Then a second pair of heels came down onto the floor, and the light in the room shifted. "Rachel," said a voice. Were the two of them the very last ones to arrive after all? Who was that woman, Rosalind thought? And a red dress. She was surpassing her completely. Somebody's mouth fell open, and the teacup went down onto the saucer with a crack. Haniel stopped in the middle of the room, looking at a figure seated with its back turned. Was this person also, she thought, with all the color draining out of her face at once? Blue eyes rose slowly to meet hers. "You are the one," the woman said. "So who exactly are you?"